The Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Now, when Martin Luther went up and nailed his 95 Theses on that door, he was nailing a testimony of a revelation he had received from God. He was nailing on that door something that had been going on in his soul, quietly and personally, for everyone to see. And out of that came the Lutheran Church, came Reformation. And a lot more than the Lutheran Church came out of that. A whole lot more. We have, everything from the public schools and to books and all sorts of things came out of that Reformation. All because he shared his testimony and nailed it to the door of the church. I encourage you all to share your testimonies, to share with each other who you are, where God has taken you. And in that light, I'm going to ask Mark, who was raised in this church, and as so many of us do, walked away from the church, and has now returned. He would like to share with you the story of his journey with God.
Thank you. I call this story From Rage Through Grace by Faith. The simplest way to kind of sum it all up in a positive light. Come on, didn't work. Technology is kind of screwed up, but when the technology doesn't work, you go with the old-fashioned way. You can tell I've done this a few times before. My journey started, I was not a well child when I was young. I was very sick. I would go to the hospital all the time. Some of the choices weren't my own. I was kind of had choices made for me, and I was driven by rage. And at that young age, I didn't know why I was driven by rage. Couldn't figure it out. So I kind of consider myself a hidden monkey because I tried to hide myself in the woods, in the front, in nature, find some peace away from the bullies and the people who always tormented me, every day of my life, for that. And it was a journey of mostly school, doctors, friends, and home. And that was my life through college, through elementary school up to high school, and that was pretty much it. And I was referring to myself in high school. I became a defensive turtle because this is the action I took when I was trying to avoid the beatings sometimes, and that was also my first introduction into the mental health care system. But the fear, the pain, the isolation, the alienation and the satisfaction of the anger. Sometimes when I would be bullied, it'd be nice to it felt good to beat back. It wasn't. I didn't always. I spent more time out of school sometimes because of that, and got into a lot of trouble. The torment and the insanity that followed, such as I'm not sure if my family knows this, but at night I'd tie myself up at night because I went bind my hands and my feet up at night before I went to bed because I didn't want to hurt anyone, because I was so afraid of myself and that I didn't want to hurt myself or anyone else. And then the treatment and the plea for understanding of what was wrong with me. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had these angry outbursts. I didn't know what to do. I cried out to God, and I didn't quite have it. God didn't always answer me. But when when in the church, there was a guy here, Deacon Hal. Some of us remember him. He was always a good person, and he was always a person I could come to and talk to me, and felt safe with him, at most times, because there were things going on that I didn't quite understand. I studied martial arts, philosophy. I studied religion and holistic alternatives to try to find ways to deal with this anger and this rage, because doctors were telling me one thing, and I was like, no, so excuse me, you're wrong. But no, the doctors were the professionals. I was wrong, and I was the patient. They were right. I was wrong, and I fought that for a lot of years. I tried to get a college degree and failed twice. And sometimes it was because of my own boredom. Sometimes it was because of other people. But the promise. The promise has delivered at a Benny Hinn. And Benny Hinn, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like Oral Roberts. Do these big stadium-wide concert revival shows, and went down to Philadelphia in 1991. And this is the message that I heard, and it's found in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. That's the promise God gave me through all the midst of the anger and rage. I took that promise, and it because I knew that God had touched me at that point, and that my life was going to change. Yet I chose the hard way. I resisted God's call in my life, and I ended up alienating every one of my friends. I alienated my family, because why would God want someone like me? I didn't think I was worthy. No matter what I tried to do, I felt like life would never change for the better. I couldn't stop the rage. Doctors I went to were treating me for a condition that was not necessarily the right condition to be treating me for. And in 1998, I contemplated suicide. The only time I've ever contemplated suicide in my life. And that because I was living in Florida, away from my family, away from my friends, no job, nobody really around that really cared about me, and I wanted to die. I wanted to walk through a wildfire, and that was my choice of wanting to go. But God said, no, because in that moment I prayed, because I don't believe in suicide. I don't believe suicide is the answer. So I prayed, and God said, go home. And so, shortly, I was home back here in Binghamton, getting myself mentally well and getting my head back together. And I went to work as a mental health advocate and activist. And because our God is an awesome God, I really believe that. Seeking for an answer and potential healing of this malady was my relationship with God as a journey through His grace, peace of mind, and by faith. I found some holistic and alternative methods and techniques through my study of religion and philosophy, which continued all the way through this, and stayed my journey. And then I had a miracle happen. The miracle was God touched me. God presented an opportunity to receive an alternative type of healing technique. And in that moment that I was with this individual who performed this technique, I felt the rage being drawn out of me like a loose thread on your sweater. And it was so a sense of peace and calm, and the rage was gone. It was gone. That was the miracle. And my life had been transformed from that point forward. Because even though I couldn't get, for a long time, Um, that's how God touched me in a way. And the path changed. And I felt my life being renewed, refreshed, restored, and revitalized. The promise was fulfilled. My mind was renewed. So it gave me hope. An awakening from the stupor, it took me about 3.5 to 4 years to kind of figure out who I was. Because it was like waking out of a coma after being in a coma for 20 years. And everything was new. Everything was different. My life was different. My relationships were different. God was different to me. Because all of a sudden, I could embrace God and answer His call upon my life. And then there's the devotion to God and service to others. And that's been my life for the last 10 years. And 10 years of volunteering with the MHA and the Catholic Charities and other different mental health organizations in the community across the town. And the door I thought was closed, literally open, because I thought I'd never, since when I left the mental health advocacy in 2003, coming back to it, I didn't think there was a chance because I thought I was blackballed for life, blacklisted for life for that. And then when I went to work for the MHA, at one of their weekend programs, that opened the door. And then a year later, I got to work for an opportunity to work for the state. I never thought I'd ever work for the state in my life, let alone enjoy working for the state that I do now. My life shifted in a direction that is God's will. When I came back to this little church in February after my father passed, I felt like I was coming home. I felt like I had never left the people, because you guys accepted me with open arms, loving hearts, and absolute forgiveness and grace and mercy. And I was ready to answer God's call in my life. And here I stand, sharing with you the good news that God is a mighty counselor, the great physician, the mighty fortress, and that He is with us always and evermore. Even when we turn our back on Him, He's always looking after us. And now I'd like to bring Bobby down here to do a song for you. I asked Bobby to share "You Touch Me" because this was a song that God used to deliver the first promise, the message of hope and healing during a time when I had no hope, and it carried me through my last mental breakdown 15 years ago. So Bobby, if you could.
as I was listening to her sing, I was thinking to myself, the disciples did not put their lives on the line 2,000 years ago for a myth. Martin Luther did not put his life on the line 200 years ago for a myth. What Mark is talking about, what Bobby sang about, is real. God is real. God is willing, and even more than that, desires to touch you. The only thing that can stop him, in my belief, is you. If you haven't already opened your heart to be touched, please take that moment to say, okay, God, have at it. Let's do it. Touch me. Make me whole.